Good morning and a warm welcome everyone to this online panel discussion organized by the European Policy Center in the framework of its Election Monitor series. Today's event is dedicated to the snap elections that took place in Germany over the weekend, when German voters went to the polls to elect a new federal parliament. An important task for the country, but given Germany's economic and political clout in Europe, their choice is also highly consequential at the European Union level. The implications of yesterday's vote can hardly be overestimated, also in view of the ongoing volatility and complexity in the geopolitical context. Today's third-year commemoration of the start of the Russian war in Ukraine and this past month's surreal events following the coming into the office of Trump administration clearly underscored the relevance of these elections. So what happened? Why and what can we expect next? To help us make sense of the results from a domestic but also European perspective, I'm delighted to welcome as speakers my brilliant colleagues, Almut Möller, Director for European and Global Affairs and Head of the Europe in the World program at the EPC, Janis Emmanouilidis, Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Studies at the EPC, and Philipp Lausberg, Senior Policy Analyst in the EPC's Europe's Political Economy program. Many thanks to all three of you for accepting this invitation and making time to engage with us in this important conversation. As always, I will first exchange with my panelists about today's topic, and then I will invite our participants to comment or ask questions live or in written. By now, I think everyone knows the drill. Those of you in the audience who wish to send us written questions, please keep them short using the Q&A function, and you can do so at any time during the event, and I will do my best to weave your input into the discussion. Everyone else who wants to intervene, please raise your virtual hand and wait for me to give you the floor when time comes. That said, let's delve straight in as we only have 1 hour at our disposal. Janis, I would like to turn to you for a start. Can you please briefly walk us through the outcome of the vote as it stands at this point? We know that the results are still preliminary and that coalition building will take at least some time, but what can be said for now about the preferences that the German voters have expressed yesterday? Who are the big winners? Who are the big losers? What are the big surprises, if any, and what does it all mean for the future direction of the country, in your opinion? Over to you, Janis.
Thank you, Corina. I will try my best to answer to all your questions, and I'm sure that my colleagues will add up. There's a lot to discuss. I remember that at the EPC, we have been analyzing German federal elections for more than 10, 15 years. So every German election we had a look at, analyzed it. And I think that this election is particular and has been particularly significant. Now, in terms of the winners and the losers and what comes next, first of all, I think that the parties of the old coalitions suffered severe, strong losses, some more than others, but I think it was a clear vote against the current, because this government is still in place, the Scholz government, also with respect to the individual parties, but also with respect to what people perceive to have been a rather poor performance over the past years. If you look into the SPD, suffered -9%, the Greens -3%, so much less, but still, the FDP -7% did not even make it into the German Bundestag. So it was a strong vote against the old coalition. The big winners are actually the fringes. The AfD, which has doubled its vote percentage from 10.4% to 20.8%. Some even expected, by the way, more for the AfD. I think also some in the AfD had hoped that it would be higher than the outcome was. But let's not forget that 80% of those who went to vote, and it was 83rd% turnout, so a very big turnout, 7% higher than it was in 2021. But 80% of those who went to vote did not vote for the AfD. So yes, they did very well, but let's not forget this. Now, the CDU-CSU are the clear winners, 28.5%. Again, there was an expectation and hope from the CDU-CSU that they would do better. There was an hope that they would do 30 plus. They ended up with 28.5, but still, they are clearly the first party, and Friedrich Merz will become the next German chancellor. Although, and one should not forget, this is the second worst result of the CDU-CSU ever. So also they have been hit in this current context, which has also to do with a low popularity rate of Friedrich Merz himself, which means that he will also have to prove himself. Now, when it comes to likely coalitions or the likely coalitions, it is a coalition among the conservatives, the CDU-CSU, and the SPD. I think this is what one can expect. They have 328 seats in the German Bundestag. The majority is at 316. So they are 20 seats above the relative majority in the German Bundestag. That is not a very strong majority, especially if you consider that in the past we were calling this coalition a grand coalition. I think it's an ex-grand coalition. Together they are around 44% and just a rather slim majority in the German Bundestag. But still, this is what the coalition will most likely will be. I say most likely because there are also some other speculations out there. In the end, yesterday night, it only became clear very light during the night once it was clear that the BSW, the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, would not be able to get over the 5% threshold, so they didn't make it into the Bundestag as the FDP, and that allowed for both the SPD and the CDU-CSU to have that majority in the Bundestag, because otherwise, if the BSW would have made it into the Bundestag, and it was very close with 4.97% of the BSW, those three parties, because it's CDU-CSU, so two conservative parties and the SPD, together would have not had a majority in the Bundestag if the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht would have made it into the Bundestag, which, by the way, should have also mentioned earlier, was also one of the winners of these elections, because it was the first time that they participated in federal elections and went from 0 to 4.97%, which is a remarkable result. And I should have also mentioned the Linke, which had 8.8%. They were close to 5, even below 5% some weeks ago. So over the past months, weeks especially, they made a very grand finish and ended up with 8.8%. So you see also, if you include them in the fringes, the BSW, Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, the left, the Linke, and the AfD did very well. The last point I think is important to note that the fact that 83% went and voted is a strong indication that people are aware of what is at stake. And I think it's not only the voters who were aware of what is at stake, it's also the parties, and also those parties which will potentially assume responsibility. Let's call them the Liberal Democrats. So not only those who will take over responsibility in the government, also the Greens, who are part, obviously, of the German Bundestag, are highly aware of what is at stake. If you look into the very difficult, you already mentioned it, Corina, economic environment in which the country finds itself, the extremely worse and geopolitical situation, with the situation in Ukraine, the uncertain future, the fact that transatlantic relations are shaken, especially following the speech of Vance in Munich. I would argue that we already knew beforehand, or we should have known, that the relationship with Washington is a totally different one in Trump 2.0. But those who will assume power, will go into the coalition partners, into the coalition, are aware of what is at stake. Also because they have in view of potentially what the next election outcome might be. If you look into the overall trend of the AfD since 2013, when the party was created, the first election result, they had 4.7%. Now they are, after 3 federal elections, at 20.8%. If you look how well they do, especially in the eastern parts of Germany, they do extremely well. And there they are by far the biggest party, well ahead of any of the other parties in the Eastern Länder. So there is a fear that if those who now assume government, and there's a high responsibility for those who assume government, that they will be able to deliver, that they will have an ability to deal with the problems which people are facing, which problems people feel are the biggest problems which the country is facing. Because if they are not able to deliver, and that's what the last years of the SPD-led coalition government since 2021 shown, the AfD will probably do better in the next election. That's their core narrative. They are the ones who actually will deliver. They are the ones who are able to deliver. The others are copying them. And actually only with them will there be change in the country. This is the narrative of the AfD, of Weidel. So they will try to profit from the upcoming years in case the upcoming government will not be able to deliver. This was a first take. On all those points, one could dig deeper.
As you mentioned, a high percentage of the electorate did go to vote, but they also voted to shift the country in a right-wing direction. So why? Why is it that they understand what's at stake and then they vote for right-leaning political options?
You want me to respond to that too?
It's a quick follow-up.
Well, first of all, as I said...
How do you explain it? I mean, you hinted at the fact that it's probably a vote on the previous government and some sort of protest vote versus the mainstream parties. But still, it's given what's at stake, it's an important statement from the electorate.
Well, first of all, let's be also analytically correct. They have 20.8%. Which means that almost 8% of those who decided to vote did not vote for them. A good amount of the electorate went to parties which are at the left, other end of the political spectrum, with the left, Die Linke, and with Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, with the latter having a strong anti-European EU conviction. Let's not forget that. But again, it's 20.8% that voted for the AfD. And it would be, I think, naive to assume that this was only a vote against the old coalition. I just said that the old coalition suffered, and I think there are reasons for why they suffered. It would also be naive to believe that it is only a protest vote. It is also a vote which is very much, there are those who are voting for them who feel they're convicted, they're convinced that the AfD is offering the right responses to what they feel are the country's biggest problems. It's a lot of young voters which have decided to vote for them, so they are attracted by the AfD. And let's not forget, as I said earlier, that also many in the eastern parts of the country have voted disproportionately higher for the AfD. Which have their own reason why they do so, which has to do also with the situation in the eastern part of Germany, but also with some longer-term historical reasons of why the AfD has been able to be very strong in these parts of Germany. So I think the reasons why the AfD has done well has also to do with what they offer as an alternative. Now, one could discuss as to whether this is realistic, but I think a lot of people feel attracted about it. It has to do with the weakness of some or many of the traditional parties, and it has to do with the previous government. So it's multiple reasons which I think have led to the AfD being where they are. And the danger is, because if you see there is a structural trend, that they actually if the situation does not improve, if the voters do not have the sentiment that their concerns are being addressed in whatever year's time, that the chances are high that they will get another structural boost, because they have gotten structural boosts since 2013 in different phases also what we call the perma-crisis. So that is also the rationale they have in mind, that that time speaks in favor of them. I'm not saying that this is the case. I'm just saying this is what they believe. And they also assume that that's what they're also conveying as a message, that Friedrich Merz will not stay in power for very long. Also, when you were witnessing the exchange which the party leaders had yesterday evening, that's a tradition in the German system that there is an Elefantenrunde, a round of elephants, if you translate it, where the leaders of the parties come together. That was also what Weidel was trying to convey, that Chancellor Merz will be a short-term chancellor, and that we will have elections much before the 4 years which the current government has been voted in favor of. Again, not saying this will happen, just saying that this is the logic they have in front of them and what their plan is.
Yeah. I mean, whatever the reasons, it's quite clear that the generational and geographic divide in Germany is becoming starker and starker. But now, Almut, I come to you. If I remember correctly, you've been in Berlin over the weekend. What can you tell us about the mood on the ground going into this vote and now after it?
Thank you very much, Corina, for convening us here. Good morning, everyone. I'm looking sort of left and right while I'm speaking, which means I have screens in which I monitor what is incoming in terms of results, because we increasingly have the granular dives into what has been happening. And I was just looking at some of the numbers that Janis talked about in terms of the AfD's most successful voting. I'm going to get back to that, because a lot of that will determine on how Germany engages at European and global level as well in the years ahead. I can tell you, Corina, that in a way, what happened last night and emerged this morning was not completely unexpected. So what was predicted in terms of the outcome is actually quite accurate. There was a bit of an uncertainty over whether the BSW and the Liberals, the Free Democrats that were part of the traffic light coalition, would make it into government or not. And this was clear this morning they wouldn't, which reduces their coalition options, but makes it also more easy, actually, in that sense, to form a government in the coming days. But with regard to the expectation regarding the AfD and also the parties of the Ampel coalition losing out, including, of course, then SPD and Greens, this was pretty accurate. And so this was already anticipated to some extent. Needless to say, though, a vote of the Alternative für Deutschland of that scope and those numbers is something that can never leave this country unaffected, and certainly not the political elites in this country that have been precisely fighting against Germany returning to very dark times. So this is a real profound impact on the mood here in Berlin this morning. What I want to focus on is a bit what Brussels can expect from Germany's next government, and Janis mapped it out already perfectly well. We are going to see a Chancellor Friedrich Merz, most likely in a coalition with the Social Democrats. I think that the message that is being sent here is that Brussels can expect responsible political figures that have a very good understanding of the severeness of the situation at global and in particular at European stage. European security, it is what has been on the minds and has not featured so much in the election campaigns for its own reasons, but has been on the minds of leaders in both parties over the past weeks. Needless to say, the Munich Security Conference made it all more visible, but it was there before. And so any future coalition government in Berlin will take very seriously the acute threat that exists with regard to European security and rebuilding the security and really also to some extent the political architecture of the European Union. Friedrich Merz has made that very clear already last night. In the Elefantenrunde, the round of elephants, my sense was there were also a few elephants in the room, but that's also the nature of these kind of maneuvering talks on election night. Friedrich Merz has been very clear in mapping out what he sees as the challenge and as a result has already underpinned his profound European orientation. He has already reached out to capitals over the past months. He will certainly expect a transition in which him being the chancellor-elect will have to be present already at European and international stage. And my sense is there have already been signals from the outgoing chancellor who I understand also benefited from Angela Merkel doing the same when he was Chancellor-elect, that there will be a way to make sure that the future Chancellor of Germany is around the relevant tables when very important steps have to be taken at European level as we speak, literally as we speak.
Yes.
We know that Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Costa and others have descended to Kiev today. In my understanding, of course, a very profound and stark reminder of this being the environment that any future government will have to engage in now. And there is no time for a transition in that sense.
Yes.
But my sense is there will be a collaborative spirit in this transition time, just because of the sheer the profound understanding that this is just dangerous and dangerous exposure of Europe at this point in time. So there will be a responsibility to make that happen. Friedrich Merz has announced that he will lead coalition talks that will end in a government formation before Easter.
But Easter is in April, and
yes.
there are meetings, important meetings happening also before that. So
yes,
yeah.
Yes, exactly. And here I expect the outgoing chancellor, who of course is still the chancellor of this country until the new Bundestag convenes formally and votes a new chancellor into office, will make sure that his successor will be around those tables. This is my expectation. This would be the right thing to do. So this is where I think Brussels can be safe to think that Germany will be around those tables, will be actively engaging and understands what is at stake. Needless to say, Germany is very much affected by overall direction of European security because of its economy and first and foremost because of its security. Yet, what I would also want to suggest, Corina, is that we look a little bit deeper into sort of the domestic situation as it evolves.
Yes, I was going to ask, because you're right that Merz was prompt to declare that his priority is to strengthen Europe's defenses, even find a replacement for NATO, if I read correctly in the media today. But will he be able to follow through on such ambitions? I mean, given the domestic situation in Germany and his potential coalition partners? Yes,
it's a very good question, Corina. And what I suggest is we look at in the coming days is first and foremost, this is the moment of the parliament, of the Bundestag. New MPs are descending to Berlin. The Bundestag as such will not convene yet, but the political groups will be meeting, both old and newly elected members of parliament. And this is always a moment in Germany, as perhaps in any other European democracy of this kind, that Parliament will feel very strongly it's for us now to put a new government into power. It will stand on our shoulders. So this is the moment to focus on Parliament. And parliamentary debates in the groups, in the political groups, in my reading, won't be that straightforward and that easy. If you look at the results of the Conservative Party, as Janis said, they were aiming for much higher, and the threat of the AfD continues to be very relevant. So the CDU and the CSU will continue to make very clear that their stance on migration in particular, but perhaps also on the question of how to engineer a good and sustainable and green economy, and I'm sure Philipp will talk about that, is being looked at through a conservative lens to try and drag votes from the AfD as the country ticks along with a new government, because the threat is very real, as Janis said, that the AfD will succeed even more in any new round of elections. And at the same time, for the SPD, with this historic defeat in the elections, in the federal elections just now, I assume there will be, of course, discussions in the parliamentary group to say, well, is it really the best strategy for us to embrace a coalition government of this kind, because we really want to recover and sort of shape our profile. And it will require a great deal of leadership, which I have no doubt does exist in the party, but to bring it to the stage of really understanding that this is a moment for Germany to be able to act, to engage, is there, but it's politically not such an easy situation, because ultimately most parliamentarians, of course, have on their minds what they see in immediate contact in their constituencies, and they've been out there campaigning and they have been confronted with very extreme positions. So this will shape very much the thinking, and it is not necessarily always a given that this will align with Germany's European and national agenda. Let's not forget, one might say that ultimately it's statesmen and stateswomen that are shaping a country's future, but the structural and political underpinning, of course, is very relevant at this point in time.
Can I actually ask you
sorry.
if you can say a few words about the campaign, and to what extent does it resonate with the problems that we know we're facing also on an on the international stage and in Europe?
Very good question. Interestingly, questions of war and peace were more absent compared to the European Parliament elections last year. And the focus was by and large on migration and the economy. And basically, since the Munich Security Conference, my sense was that while leaders were, of course, acknowledging the profound changes that are happening, there was almost, not saying an active attempt, but it wasn't so easy to engage on these questions in the federal election campaign, because so many fundamental questions have to be addressed, some of which go against the instincts of German electorates. We have known that peace and war is, beyond voters that vote for the AfD or for the BSW, something very sensitive in this country because of its history, of course. And a lot of the transatlantic instincts that political elites have might not sort of resound that much within the German wider electorate. So there was a really complex environment over the past weeks, and things European and international didn't feature really that much in the electoral campaign. It was actually quite a divisive and quite a sort of confrontational campaign, which also suggests that if Conservatives and Social Democrats were to enter into a coalition, quite a bit of mending will have to be done, because you have to acknowledge that you have to be able to work together, but at the same time face that there have been really quite some divisions over the past months, including during the time of the opposition of the Conservative Party. All of this can be overcome, but it's going to be very challenging.
Yes. Thank you very much, Almut. Philipp.
I want to make one more point, Corina, if you allow me. Because
okay.
This is important.
If it's brief, yes.
Yes, it's brief, but it's important. It's been being overlooked, even in the German context, quite a bit. If future Chancellor Merz decides to go for a coalition with the Social Democrats, a two-party coalition, which, of course, is more appealing than a three-party coalition that requires a lot of coordination, it is still the question to what extent he can succeed in showing that his government is effective and efficient, because the German system is a federal system, and the 16 federal states of Germany matter greatly because they have to co-legislate every single piece of national legislation. They have power to different degrees, whether to shoot it down, amend it, or just basically take note of it. But they have to be consulted on every single piece of legislation. Now, I don't want to go too deep into the sort of the numbers there, but at first sight, you might say, well, there is 7 federal states that are run by the CDU, 7 federal states that are run by an SPD leader. Well, it's not as simple as that. These are coalition governments, and you need a certain threshold of votes, of majority votes in the second chamber. And that means that CDU and SPD won't find that majority that they need to co-legislate in that chamber. So they will have to engage with broader majorities here, in particular with regard to the Green Party. And the pressure, and this will be my last point, the pressure that will come also from CDU German federal states in light of elections ahead. I was just looking at the number of how the AfD scored in Sachsen-Anhalt, which is an East German federal state, with a responsible CDU prime minister for many, many years. I was listening to him this morning on national radio, and the AfD came out with 37.5% in his federal state, and elections are coming up next week. So the pressure will also come from that level to their own party at national level, because the ultimate job is to fence off the AfD, to make sure that it does not succeed more in the coming elections. And the extent to which this will align with European interest will have to be decided and answered on a step-by-step or case-by-case demonstration. And this is a lens I think we need to understand and also adapt when we're trying to understand things German in the coming months and years. Thank you.
Very good point, Almut. And of course, it's not just a question of numbers. It's also that the two potential coalition partners don't necessarily see eye to eye on all matters, especially when it comes to the economy. And maybe we can come back to that issue. And maybe this is a good entry point to bring in Philipp and to link also to one of the questions that was written from our audience. Philipp, given the results, is Germany now in a better position to address its economic woes? Merz has been presenting himself as a bold economic reformer, but can he walk the talk, in your opinion?
Thanks, first of all, for having me on here, and good morning to everyone. Yes, I mean, as you say, I mean, the economy figured very largely in the election campaigns. The population is worried about a decline of the German economy, of its industry in particular, and of course, all parties have introduced their remedies or proposed something. My feeling is that the problem here is that a lot of people have not really understood yet, and I'm including some of the politicians in the leading parties, that this is not just a cyclical dent, this is a structural problem that the German economy is facing. The whole model actually is under pressure, and with a rapidly changing world, quite bold action will have to be is needed. And my feeling is that neither Merz nor the SPD leaders are ready to do that, and especially they haven't really prepared the population for that. So they've made a lot of grand promises, CDU mainly on cutting taxes and cutting red tape, and they see that as sort of the way of getting the economy back on track. On the other hand, the SPD has taken a little bit more of a supply side approach as well. They propose a fund for infrastructure and also some tax refunds for equipment investments and things like that. But it seems to me that most of these things are falling short of what actually needs to be done. And if you look at all the bases of the German model that made it so successful in the past, they're all more or less under pressure or gone. So you look at cheap energy, abundance of a high-skilled workforce, but also a technological edge, enough investment, export, the export-led growth model that the Germany used to profit so much from is massively under threat, of course, now that free trade is on retreat. Also, the global rule-based order has been very important for that, and the peace dividend. So, and then if you look at individual cases here, so energy, I mean, of course, the advantage of cheap Russian energy is gone. What Germany really needs is to, focus on the so-called Energiewende, so to increase the share of renewables. There, I think the CDU is rather trying to make a step back. Some of these reforms introduced by the previous government have been badly designed, but I think here what really needs, what the economy needs to really, push clean tech, but also the grid infrastructure is, planning security, but also more investments, of course. And, the CDU is trying to maybe, renegotiate the combustion engine phase out, but also get rid of the heating law. So there's no, there doesn't seem to be a clear plan here on energy. When it comes to tech, Germany, of course, has really falling behind when it comes to digitalization, which, of course, is one of the key levers for competitiveness. That's also what Mario Draghi, of course, stressed in his report. Germany is a classical country being stuck in what he calls the mid-tech trap. So what needs to be done is really transversal investments in AI to really get the industry updated to the next stage. Also, when it comes to automotive, of course, German industry has a little bit slept into the electrical mobility change, but also into digitalization again. A lot more needs to be done there. So there's massive needs for investments, and that's something that I don't really see coming from the plans, at least that the parties have presented. The promises they have presented implemented. And yeah, if you look at US and China, what they invest, they are successful essentially because they have been able to mobilize massive resources in investments in strategic industries. And that is what Germany needs. And yeah, Merz, he wants to keep the CDU at least said in their program, they want to keep the debt brake. I mean, Merz has been a little bit vague about this now, so I'm slightly hopeful that he might change course on that, given the pressures that we're facing. I would even say it is likely, especially, of course, on defense. That's another big issue. I might come back to that later. But the main thrust of the CDU economic policy is really about lowering taxes and cutting red tape. And that is also echoing a little bit the sort of Brussels debate on red tape. But I think you cannot get a whole economy just jump started just by cutting red tape. And I think also with cutting taxes, I mean, some of the CDU's plans, I mean, they would amount to around 100 billion less in tax income, while at the same time the economy has been stagnating. I mean, there has been no growth since 2019. How are you supposed to keep the budget up or like pay the existing budget positions? I mean, it's not clear how that's supposed to work. It's mainly demand side, the measures from the CDU here, and I'm not sure how it's going to work. I think they will have to make massive changes in their plans, and that will, of course, also frustrate some of their voters who were promised something different. And then you see the SPD. I mean, as I said before, there is a little bit more positivity about industrial policy there, including this 10% tax refund for investments, which would be a little bit more targeted. Also, it's about investments in businesses in Germany. So it's this sort of made in Germany component that could also pose a problem for the single market, which of course relies on a level playing field. And as we know, other countries don't have the deep pockets that Germany has to invest in the industry. The SPD also wants to keep up, and I mean both more or less want to keep up some of the social spending when it comes to pensions. I think both promise to keep or even increase the level. How is that supposed to be financed? I don't know, especially if you want to invest into competitiveness. And then, I mean, the SPD wants to raise the minimum wage. That could give it some demand impulses, of course, but altogether, I think the problem here is, the change is not being proposed or probably not be done timely enough, and it will not be done on a scale that is needed. I think
what I'm hearing is also that whatever happens, it might not actually go down well with the voters, because if you have change, probably their impression won't change with respect to their situation, and if there is no change, it won't get better either. So it is a little bit of a catch-22 situation as far as I'm hearing from you. But what I wanted to also ask you, if you can incorporate it in your intervention and linking to one of the questions that our audience has posed, if in the process of fixing the German economy and then possibly changing the model, do you think climate policy will take a hit? What will the effect of all this be when it comes, for example, to the European Green Deal?
Yeah, I mean, climate policy will surely take a hit. The Greens are not in government anymore. They're the only ones who really made this a topic, climate change, during the election. And I mean, the main issues are, as in the EU as well, it's competitiveness and it's defense. And the focus will lie on that. But I mean, you can even from a competitiveness angle, I think the advantages of having, renewables is clear. Also, when it comes to security, the supply security. So I think that it's pretty obvious that something will need to be done there. So my hope is that they will, push still renewables, but for different reasons. But in general, yes, I agree. Also, when it comes to the combustion engine ban, I think they have voices who want to renegotiate that or prolong the use of fuels or of fuel driven cars. yeah, I think the Green Deal also might be an issue when it comes to the, you know, for the CDU, especially when it comes to their, you know, cutting red tape drive, which is part of the key element, is one of the key elements of guaranteeing more competitiveness. So it will definitely figure much less prominently, and it will be probably sacrificed for other goals whenever possible, unless these goals, you know, as I said before, a lot of the green energy goals, they also work well for increasing resilience and competitiveness. And there I see some hope, but in general, I think the topic itself has much lower priority.
Thank you very much, Philip. I think at this point, I would like to encourage our participants to come in if they have questions and comments. I see that there is one hand up from Helga Schmidt. If you are listening, Helga, I'm going to give you the floor to pose your question now. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much again for this opportunity. I've got a question concerning foreign affairs and defense, because you've already referred to Merz's clear statement last night. I think it was remarkably clear when he assessed the danger posed by Donald Trump in a similar way to the danger posed by Putin. Also, I understood that he sees NATO in a real danger. What do you think will he do now? Will he go into that direction, like strengthening the European pillar within NATO? Or do you think outside NATO, would that even be possible? And second question, because of the enormous debt of large EU countries. So if everybody wants them to spend more, France, Italy, Spain, massively more in defense, do you think Merz will finally go to, let's speak out the forbidden word, Eurobonds, or has he got any other choice? What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Helga. And maybe I will also bring in another question, except that my well, maybe Almut, can you go ahead and answer it, because my screen decided to freeze, so I cannot go back to the Q&A box.
Happily, Corina. Good morning, Helga Schmidt, and very good to have you with us. Thank you for those very interesting observations. And I share your assessment. I mean, what has been happening over the past days, the statements that Friedrich Merz has given, really suggests a change of course. And I think this is driven by sheer necessity. I would have thought that Friedrich Merz has very strong transatlantic instincts, as have many parts of his own party. And at the same time, he has been so clear since the Munich Security Conference in addressing what has been happening in the sort of transatlantic new dimension of Russia and the United States. And so for me, that suggests he will absolutely want to be at the core of architectural work on what needs to be done now in order to reshape the European security architecture. And my sense is that it will be also crossing what has been a taboo, and you also mentioned that, and Philipp has been working on this, financing defense. The question over certain mechanisms that allow us to, I wouldn't even call them Euro or defense bonds at this point in time, but mechanisms that can help bring this leverage that is needed about. And my sense is he will be willing to cross both those lines that have existed, the transatlantic orientation on the one hand, and also the question of financing European defense. And that is driven by a clear understanding of the seriousness of the situation. Interestingly, he has placed himself, perhaps not so visibly and successfully with his own electorates, but with Chancellor Kohl's legacy in the election campaign, which for me meant that he's really already trying to pave the way for something that will be a profound change that he has to help engineer. And in what ways he's going to do that? I mean, my sense would be, or my kind of advice, humble advice to those who will be in power in Berlin in the future, is probably to do both at the same time. On the one hand, explore in an all-hands-on-deck approach what it takes to strengthen European security, but beyond the question of EU membership, because let's face it, part of the Trumpism is already inside of the European Union as well, to look at those who are wanting to engage in a meaningful way Of course, Poland is a very important country in this regard, as is the United Kingdom, a non-EU country. Look at what the European Union can contribute with regard to leveraging the single market on defense, but also extend that to other partners that are key to European security and that are like-minded. He will want to be part of that and help engineer that. As a matter of fact, he's already done that in some ways by convening party leaders and prime ministers in Berlin a few weeks ago. And then at the same time, I think the question over the future direction of NATO, it's a fine line. I mean, I would say don't place your eggs only in one basket. Make sure in an all-hands-on-deck approach that, yes, the European pillar in NATO is stronger than it has been before. Help fix the sort of the deficits that EU member states have had through leveraging, European Union funds, but then at the same time also prepare for a future in which NATO can no longer play the role for European security. So all of this suggests a huge architectural work that has to be done. And that is not only about European security, but also affects the political order of Europe. And my expectation is that Friedrich Merz as a chancellor will be at the very heart and will want to be at the very heart of this re-engineering.
Philipp, did I see your hand up as well? You wanted to come in on this particular issue?
Said most of it, but then I would also assume that Merz will take a leading role. We will see more leadership from him than from Scholz, that's for sure. And I also have the hunch that there could be a major change of the approach of the CDU towards the Eurobonds when it comes to defense. I think he said quite clearly in after the election that these are times like no other. So I think that could be seen as also that he uses that as a reason for then also use policies like they weren't used before. I think when it comes to German defense spending, there's massive needs of investment, and I think he also indicated already that there is the possibility to take investment spending outside of the debt brake, outside of the budget, similar to the 100 billion special fund that was introduced in 2022, but which is running out in 2026. So there will have to come something new very soon. Also, I mean, the new NATO goals will probably be risen to 3%. That would mean tripling German investment in defense compared to 2021 by 3. So I mean, it's a lot that has to be done, but I think he will try to get there, even though 3% will be a tall order.
Thank you, Philipp.
Yeah, just
Janis, I know you want to come in, and I would also want to prompt you more specifically on two questions that we have from the audience in the Q&A box, which ask about the expectations regarding Merz's collaboration with EU leaders like Macron and Tusk, but also with the UK, and whether there is a difference when it comes to Germany's engagement on the European stage that is different from Olaf Scholz. I will ask you specifically to answer that, but also just in order to bring in more voices, I will turn to the other one hand. Well, yeah, there's two more hands up, and I will bring those in, and then we'll close. Martin Högeland, I think, was first. So, Martin, if you are with us, please, you can pose your question now. Martin, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, please ask your question.
Thank you so much, and many thanks for the interesting contributions. My question pertains to what Philipp was just saying about fiscal space and about making room for defense spending. My understanding is that if they were to set up a new special fund, they would still need a 2/3 majority, right? Because it would have to be in the constitution like the current defense fund is, which might be a problem, no, with the current constellation. So any thoughts on this, or do I have it wrong? Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And Arda Chikoglu, if you are with us and you still want to ask your question, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Super. I'm Caner Çiloğlu. I'm from the Turkish Industry and Business Association's permanent representation to the EU. My question to all three of you, whoever would like to answer that on that regard. My question to you is in regards to how the incoming Chancellor Merz and the new government, especially after it's formed, can formulate a cohesive policy when it comes to non-EU member states of the European Union, because you mentioned European security, but the thing about European security, it's understood differently by all other countries. It's understood differently by Turkey, it's understood differently by UK, and it's understood very differently by Poland. For example, NATO has a very strong policy because of Turkey that they cannot share intelligence with non-NATO EU member states, like Austria, for example. So if you're a part of EU, but you're not part of NATO, then you're not part of the European security architecture by default because of NATO policy standards that are upheld by countries like Turkey and UK. So how can Germany navigate through such waters and make sure that EU and NATO are on the same page and they don't diverge based upon national interests when it comes to, as you mentioned, now that it's the third anniversary of the Russian invasion into Ukraine, issues like Ukraine and China and Iran and so forth.
Thank you very much for that. Janis, I give you first the floor. Please don't forget about the questions from the written questions that I posed to you earlier.
I'll start from that. First of all, I think that what you can expect in terms of his leadership style of Friedrich Merz will be very different from what you have seen from Olaf Scholz. I feel that Olaf Scholz never felt himself at home in Brussels, at the table of the European Council. I think that Merz will try to play a stronger role in the European Council in his interaction. Tusk and Macron were already mentioned, but it goes beyond those two. He will try to play and position Germany as in a stronger leadership position at the European level. That goes both with respect to the EU, but it also goes with respect to NATO. Now, at the same time, he has the challenge of making himself respected in Germany itself. As I said earlier, it's the first time that he's in such a executive leadership position, that being the number one, being the chancellor, obviously for the first time. There are a lot of doubts with respect to his ability to portray leadership at the German level and also beyond. So he will have to prove himself. That was also the case with respect to Olaf Scholz, who had to prove himself after 16 years of Angela Merkel. This was very difficult for Olaf Scholz because he had to get into big shoes. It will probably be easier for Merz because of the track record of the last chancellor and the last coalition government. However, having said that, what he needs to do is to square a very difficult circle. He needs to live up which the expectations of many in the German population is when it comes to the economy. Philipp was alluding towards the different promises that have been made, also from the CDU-CSU. And he will have to live up to the new geopolitical reality we're living in. Again, we should have not been shocked at what happened in Munich because we knew or we saw it coming. And actually, the need to strengthen European defense is not a new need, but the pressure is now obviously a totally different one. He is a strong transatlanticist, Merz, but he has understood what the new environment looks like. So squaring that circle, and at the same time also having a different mindset in terms of what you do at the European level, because saying that you will show leadership at the EU level is one thing, is rhetoric, but actually doing the changes that you need to do at the European level, look into implementing the Draghi report. What actually needs to be done requires a totally new mindset. When it comes to European defense, it requires a totally new mindset. While you need to square the circle with respect to also what the German population is asking for. And let's also not forget, there are severe differences between the three parties who will be part of the coalition government. And I always mention three because there are three. We shouldn't forget that there's also the CSU in Munich. It's not only the CDU, CSU, and the SPD, it's also the CSU in Munich. Squaring the circle when it comes to some of these questions will not be easy, especially when it comes to defense, where the SPD, there's a different appreciation about in large parts of the party when it comes to foreign and security and defense policy. So I'm just saying that even if he has the aspiration to play a stronger role at the European level, and he still needs to move himself into that position. He needs to get used to what it means to be operating at that level, something totally new to him. He will also face a lot of different problems at the national level. So I'm not disregarding that he will try, that there is a stronger conviction also among the German, big parts of the German political elites that will form also this government and will also be supporting them to play a certain role at the European level and to push the debate further, and that there are severe differences between them and what, for example, you hear from the AfD, which wants to position Germany as a neutral country also vis-a-vis Moscow, which is totally incomprehensible if you look into the history since 2014 or 2022. So it will be difficult for him to maneuver in this kind of a situation. And I think we should not forget that. When it comes to deficit spending, it is clear that the next German government will have to move. But it is confined by the Schuldenbremse, both in legal terms, if you look into Karlsruhe, but also in political terms. But they will try to move, which means the option they have is to look for something which is very targeted, ad hoc, limited, not structural, no means Eurobonds. Maybe something in the direction of Next Generation EU or following that logic. But if you look into the European level, and this is where I will conclude, if you look into the readiness of the EU 27 to move in this direction, also if you look into the EU leaders meeting a couple of weeks ago, the readiness to have a shift of mindset when it comes to defense spending, I think is not as strong as we believe. And there is no agreement among the 27. There are some among the 27 who do not want to move in this position, who have a stronger alignment with Putin Moscow, who want a different kind of policy, who support what is coming out of Washington, what is coming from Vance, what is coming from Trump, what is coming from the administration Trump 2.0. So finding an agreement at the European level will also be difficult and pushing for it. So what is more realistic, it seems, is that you will come up with a conglomerate of different decisions with respect to defense, including an EIB element, including an element regarding deficit spending. So a mixture of different things where I question myself whether this will be enough in lines of the mindset what is required.
Right. Okay. Well, Almut and Philipp, I'm going to give you less than 1 minute each if you want to address some of the questions that were put on the table. Almut?
I want to build on the very good point that Jan made on European security and the need to understand whom to engage and how, and Turkey, of course, also is a case in point here. And I will say that the way to understand these elections and their impact will really have to go through understanding the global context we're in. And I will come in a minute, Corina, then to the question of where the AfD will be, for instance, in terms of groupings in the European Parliament. The implications of what has happened prior to Munich, but since Munich, are so profound that we have to look at an overall architectural overhaul, of things European, and that goes way beyond European security. Of course, this is where Europeans are most acutely vulnerable, but the political architecture will have to also be adapted to this. Europe's economic power that has benefited from global order that allowed it to play out its strengths is being dismantled now at an even faster pace. And the future of liberal order, liberal democracy in Europe is in question. And of course, remains the question how Europeans interact with the US and other parts of the world in the future. So the task ahead is very clear and it is enormous, and it will have to happen against political forces right at the center of the European Union and European countries that actually want to work against that and that are in line with what President Trump has put forward. So my assumption is that the AfD will now sit together with its sister and brother parties across Europe to understand how to best achieve that end, because time is playing in their eyes for them now. And so this is the overall answer I have to the question where the AfD is going to go. There will be very clear strategizing happening right now, and this goes well beyond the German context. So this is the big space that also the future German government will have to watch. And we are not looking at a small transition of the European Union and its member states. We are looking at a big transition of Europe in the years ahead. And I'm not able to map out what the union will look like in the end of all of this, but it will look very, very different and will have to look very different.
Yeah. Well, we have come to the end of our discussion, but I want to push it a little bit and just give you 20 seconds each to end with one recommendation that you have for, for the new chancellor, for Merz. If there's one thing you would advise him to do, what will that be? Can you keep it at 20 seconds, please? Philipp, you get the floor first for this round.
If I could recommend anything, it would be modifying the debt brake. But as the question that was asked for before by Martin already indicated, you need a 2/3 majority for that. And it's right that the AfD and Die Linke have a so-called Sperrminorität, so they can block that. I think last time I looked, it was 6 seats or something. It's very thin, but that could really become a problem in the future and could potentially even break this government. If I have to say one thing, debt brake needs to move.
Perfect. Janis, what about you?
Share the hard truth with the German public. This was not done during the election campaign. That relates to the EU. It relates to Europe's role when it comes to the security, which requires a lot of difficult decisions, including also in Germany. And that is something the German public should be more confronted with, because otherwise you will not be able to push these things through or push them through at the European level.
Mm-hmm. Hard truth. And Almut, the very final word.
Say that, but my then alternative take is for Friedrich Merz, be out there in presence and at a fast pace with your European partners, and be transparent about what Germany wants to do and what it can achieve given the domestic context, because expectations are always high with regard to Germany. And this change that we're discussing will be profound. So Merz will have to make himself understood, and he will have to be more open about the domestic constraints he faces. So if he managed to do that, I think that was a good start, especially if it was happening already before he's being formally voted into office.
Thank you so much. The bad news is that we have to conclude, but the good news is that the conversation continues. We do have an event on Germany that will bring in the European perspectives on the results. So stay tuned for that. It's happening tomorrow. Thank you very much to my panelists for their excellent contributions, and many thanks to our public as well for being so active. A great afternoon and week to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.